One word carved into a tree, then 117 people vanished forever. The Lost Colony of Roanoke, North Carolina, 1587 to 1590. Imagine arriving somewhere after a long and dangerous journey, only to find nothing. No people, no bodies, no signs of struggle, no explanation, just an empty settlement, silent as a grave, surrounded by the ancient forests of the American coast. And carved into the bark of a tree, just one word. Croatoan. That is what Governor John White found when he returned to Roanoke Island, North Carolina, on August 18, 1590. He had left 3 years earlier to sail back to England for supplies. He had left behind 117 men, women, and children, including his own daughter, and his newborn granddaughter, the first English child ever born on American soil. They were all gone. More than 400 years later, the mystery of what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke remains one of the oldest and most haunting unsolved puzzles in all of American history. To understand what happened on that desolate island, you have to go back to the late 1500s, a time when England was hungry. Not hungry for food, hungry for power. Hungry for land, hungry for a piece of the new world that Spain had been claiming for decades. Queen Elizabeth I sat on the English throne. She was ambitious, brilliant, and determined that England would plant its flag in the Americas. She granted permission to a wealthy nobleman named Sir Walter Raleigh to establish England's first permanent colony in the New World. Raleigh chose an island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Roanoke Island. A thin strip of land surrounded by water, thick with forest, and already home to several indigenous tribes who had lived on this land for thousands of years. The first English expedition arrived in 1585. It failed. Food ran short. Relations with the local tribes collapsed. The settlers sailed home in desperation. But Raleigh was not a man who accepted failure easily. 2 years later, in 1587, he sent a second expedition. This time, the plan was different. This was not a military outpost. This was meant to be a home. Among the 117 settlers who made the crossing were families. Husbands and wives, children, and one heavily pregnant woman, Eleanor White Dare, daughter of the colony's governor, John White. On August 18, 1587, just days after arriving on Roanoke Island, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter. They named her Virginia Dare, the first English child ever born on American soil. For one brief moment, the colony felt like the beginning of something extraordinary. It would not last. Within weeks of arriving, the colony was in trouble. Supplies were dangerously low. The land was unfamiliar and unforgiving. Relationships with some of the local tribes had already turned hostile. One colonist had already been killed. The settlers made a desperate decision. They asked their governor, John White, to sail back to England himself. To get help. To bring back food, medicine, and reinforcements. Think about what this man was being asked to do. To board a ship and sail across the Atlantic Ocean, leaving behind his daughter, his son-in-law, and his newborn granddaughter, baby Virginia, just weeks old. He went, because he had no choice. Because the colony's survival depended on it. Before he left, the settlers made him a promise. If they were forced to leave Roanoke Island, they would carve the name of their destination into a tree. And if they were in danger, they would add a cross above it. White sailed away in late 1587. He fully intended to return within months. He would not set foot on American soil again for 3 years. When John White arrived back in England, he was met with a crisis he could not have anticipated. England was at war. The Spanish Armada, the most powerful naval fleet in the world, was bearing down on English shores. Queen Elizabeth had ordered that every available ship be kept in port for national defense. No exceptions. White begged. He pleaded with anyone who would listen. His daughter was out there. His granddaughter was out there. 115 other souls were depending on him. Nobody listened. Months passed. Then a year. Then 2. White managed to secure 2 small ships in 1588, but they were attacked by pirates before reaching Roanoke and were forced to turn back. It was not until August of 1590, 3 agonizing years after he had left, that John White finally stepped ashore on Roanoke Island again. The date was August 18, 1590. His granddaughter Virginia Dare's 3rd birthday. There was no birthday celebration. There was no sound of voices, no smell of cooking fires, no movement among the trees. The settlement stood silent and empty. The houses were dismantled. The fort had been reinforced with a palisade of logs, as if the settlers had prepared for something. And carved into the post of the entrance, in neat, deliberate letters, the word Croatoan. No cross above it, no sign of distress, just that single, cryptic word, pointing somewhere, and explaining nothing. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, what we now call Hatteras Island, about 50 miles to the south. It was also the name of the tribe that lived there, a tribe that had always been friendly to the English settlers. White desperately wanted to sail to Croatoan and search, but a violent storm was approaching. His ship's captain refused to risk the vessel. They were forced to sail back to England. John White never returned to America. He never found his daughter. He never learned what became of baby Virginia. He spent the rest of his life not knowing. So what did happen to the 117 colonists of Roanoke? Over 4 centuries, historians have put forward several theories. The first theory, attack. Some historians believed the settlers were massacred by hostile tribes or by Spanish forces sailing from Florida. But there were no bodies. No weapons left behind. No signs of any battle at all. The second theory, starvation. Records show that a devastating drought gripped the region during those years. Food would have been desperately scarce. Perhaps the settlers scattered inland, searching for food, and simply never found their way back. The third theory, and the one that has gained the most traction, is perhaps the most unexpected. That the colonists did not die at all. That they walked into the forest, found the friendly Croatoan tribe on Hatteras Island, and were welcomed. That they chose, or were forced by desperation, to assimilate. To become part of a new community. To survive by leaving their old world behind completely. And now, in 2024 and 2025, archaeologists believe they may finally have proof. Excavations on Hatteras Island, the island once called Croatoan, have uncovered something remarkable. In April 2025, researchers unearthed large quantities of hammerscale, the microscopic iron flakes produced only by the process of blacksmithing. This matters enormously, because the Croatoan people, like all indigenous tribes of that era, had no knowledge of iron working. The technology simply did not exist in their culture. There is only one explanation for hammerscale buried deep in a Croatoan rubbish heap on Hatteras Island. The English settlers were there. Other discoveries support this. Gun parts, mixed and matched from different weapons, repaired and reused as if new parts could not be obtained. English earrings and copper wire that had been bent and reshaped into fishhooks. English pottery fragments buried alongside Algonquian cooking vessels. These are not the artifacts of people who were massacred. These are the artifacts of people who adapted, who survived, who lived, perhaps for decades, among the Croatoan people. The lead archaeologist on the project described the hammerscale discovery as definitive proof that the English settlers moved to Hatteras Island and lived among the Croatoans. If the archaeologists are right, and the evidence increasingly suggests they are, then the story of the lost colony is not the tragedy we always imagined. It is something far more remarkable. 117 people, stranded in an unfamiliar wilderness, facing starvation, disease, and the unknown, made an extraordinary choice. They laid down the idea of who they were supposed to be, English settlers, building an English colony for an English queen, and they chose instead to live. They walked into a new community, learned a new language, adopted new customs, and built new lives on the shores of what would one day become America. Baby Virginia Dare, America's first English child, may have grown up not as an English girl in a European colony, but as something entirely new. A child of two worlds. The first true American. The word Croatoan was not a cry for help. It was not a warning. It was a direction. We went this way. We are still here. Come and find us. It took 430 years. But we may finally have found them. That is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, 117 people, one carved word, and 4 centuries of mystery that may at last be finding its answer. I want to hear from you. Do you believe the colonists assimilated with the Croatoan tribe? Or do you think something darker happened on that island 4 centuries ago? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Next week on Story Hour USA, we bring you a story that is almost impossible to believe. A young man who convinced the world he was a doctor, a lawyer, and an airline pilot all before the age of 21. And got away with it for years. If stories like this speak to you, real stories, told with care and respect, I would be honored to have you join the Story Hour USA family. Subscribe, and stay with us every week. And until next time, stay curious and stay safe.